Hello whisky fans and happy Cinco de Mayo. So last year when I did some Cinco de Mayo themed videos, I touched on the fact that it's not really a proper Mexican holiday, it's more of an American thing, and I think it's probably more of a modern phenomena, but great excuse to drink some Mexican themed spirits. So last year I reviewed the Ilegal Mezcal and the Jose Cuervo Tequila. This year I'm going to go a little bit different. This year I've got a Mezcal finished whiskey. And more exciting than that, it's a Kilchoman. It's been a while since I've had a Kilchoman on the channel. It's been a while since I've had an Islay whiskey on the channel that's not a Laphroaig or an Ardbeg, I think. So quite excited about that. Been to Kilchoman myself in person. It's a wonderful, small-scale, in-house craft-produced whiskey. They brand themselves as Islay's farm distillery, which is certainly true, and you'll know that if you've been there. And despite the fact that they've not even been there for 20 years yet, they're making some incredible whiskey. Even when they were putting out stuff that was only 5 years old, it was amazing stuff. And very heavily peated stuff as well. I think the last Kilchoman that I reviewed was probably the unpeated special edition that they did in a sherry butt. Really good whiskey as well, just highlights the fact that they're not using that peat as a crutch. They really know their stuff. So in terms of presentation with this one, comes in your standard Kilchoman style bottle, which I really like. I like dumpy bottles. I think that they look really nice, less likely to knock them over. And this whiskey is presented in the kind of theme that we've seen from Kilchoman for the last few years. Not entirely sure if I like the little weird coin thing on the top there, but it's part of their brand, very recognisable. As for the box, square box, very compact, kind of no nonsense. Red box, as you get with, I think, all of their single cask releases. You may already be aware, if you've heard of this one, that it's not actually technically a proper Kilchoman release. It's bottled exclusively for the Whiskey Exchange, which I kind of have a little bit of a problem with. I always feel like when I review and obviously hype up, if it's good, a whiskey which is bottled exclusively for someone, I feel like I'm kind of advertising for that company, and I don't like having a middleman in my whiskey purchasing chain. It somehow feels slightly different to a proper independently bottled whiskey, but this one was just too interesting to pass up, so I went for it. It's not a cheap whiskey, although obviously it's single cask and cask strength, but retails for just over £90, so it is a little bit of an expensive one. Details that we've got on the box and the label comes in at 52.8%, so that's a very healthy cask strength. It's 8 years old, it's matured in bourbon casks and finished in mezcal casks for 9 months. And that is a little bit strange for Kilchoman, because Kilchoman don't normally cask finish their whiskey. They normally believe in maturing full term and then vatting their casks together, which in my opinion tends to work much better than cask finishes. I do wonder if the fact that this is a cask finish whiskey might be something to do with the fact that the SWA only very recently made mezcal and tequila casks a legal means of maturing whiskey here in the UK. So it might have been a case that when the rules were changed, Kilchoman got hold of some tequila and mezcal casks, because there is a tequila version of this as well, and used those for a cask finish to try and see what it was like, to try and assess whether it is something worth pursuing or not, and to get some of the stuff on the market and get some feedback as quickly as possible perhaps. Because bearing in mind that mezcal and tequila casks haven't been legal for maturing whiskey for that long, any whiskey which is matured full term in a tequila or mezcal cask is going to be very young stuff at the moment. The fact that the SWA recently legalised mezcal and tequila casks for maturing Scotch whisky, I've always found a little bit odd. I think Calvados was thrown in there as well as another cask which was not allowed before, that's been recently allowed, put on the list. And the grounds that the SWA had for banning them in the past is that they said it wasn't traditional. And I always kind of thought, how do you define traditional with something like whiskey, which has kind of constantly evolved over its reasonably short lifespan of, it's only really been mass produced in anything like its current form for the last 200-300 years. How do you decide what is traditional? And you kind of think, traditional since when? And who gets to decide that? In the original days of distillation, if the people distilling their whiskey had had a bunch of bottles laying around, it would have probably come off the still and gone into those bottles. If they'd have had a claret wine cask laying around that didn't have any other purpose, it would have gone into that. If all they've had was an old rusty bathtub. So I do find it very strange that they're defining certain casks as traditional and other ones as not. I guess really they're probably trying to protect the flavour style, the flavour profile of whiskey that's going out under the banner of Scotch Whisky, and probably being the SWA, they're protecting their own members as well. It's what they want to do. But me personally, I really like mezcal, tequila as well. I went for the mezcal version of this over the tequila because I really like my smoky spirits, and mezcal almost always has a greater amount of smoke to it than tequilas. Other details that we've got from this one on the box and the label. This is bottle number 114, if anyone's wondering which bottle I've got. And it's a very, very small batch because the mezcal expression is a limited run of 223 bottles. If you do want to try this stuff, even though it is very expensive, I think there is some of this still available. We know that it's a single cask whiskey. We know that, as per normal with Kilchoman, it's non-chill filtered and natural colour. Fantastic. I don't think it actually says on here anywhere that it is cask strength, although at 52.8% ABV, it kind of seems like they want you to assume that it is cask strength, and at that cask strength, it probably is. It is one of my pet peeves that a lot of distilleries, they'll bottle high or high strength whiskies and just kind of lead you to believe it is cask strength. But personally, I don't see any reason for why Kilchoman would have added any water to this, so probably is. We also, and I find this one a little bit odd as well, know that this whiskey is peated to a phenol level of 50 ppm. I'll just show you the label there so you can have a read yourself. There is a date filled and a date bottled on that label as well, so fantastic that they're giving us that level of information. From that we know that this is an 8-year-old whiskey. But that ppm, it's going to be interesting to see if it tastes like your typical 50 ppm Kilchoman, because I believe all of the, apart from the 100% Islay releases from Kilchoman, I think they're all peated to 50 ppm, whereas the 100% Islay ones that they peat themselves on their farm, on their own malting floor with their own kiln, those ones, unless it's changed recently, come in at a lower ppm. I think it's around 25. But I'm very interested to see if this one tastes like your typical 50 ppm or if it's a little bit smokier than that, because in theory we should be getting some smokiness coming through from that mezcal finish as well. So let's get some in the glass, see what we've got. Love Kilchoman. As soon as you open the bottle, you can smell that trademark Islay peat. Bearing in mind that Kilchoman have not been around for that long, I think it's really testament to them and how well they're doing, how seriously they take their craft, and how good their products are, that they've really been embraced by the whisky community. You never hear anyone saying that they don't like Kilchoman. And I think that the attitude from the other distilleries and the whisky industry as a whole, to start with, there is a little bit of doubt that these new guys were moving into Islay and they thought that they can set up an Islay distillery and do what all the other guys have been doing for the last 200 years. But I think that they've completely wiped the smirks off all the doubters' faces. Kilchoman has arrived. They are a key part of Islay now, and they're making incredibly good stuff, which is at least as good as what you get from the other Islay distilleries. So Kilchoman Mezcal finish on the nose. Incredibly medicinal, really good. I love this, and I think that anyone that likes their really medicinal, heavily peated Islay Scotch is going to love this. Getting some really nice dirty, earthy smoke sitting on top of that usual Kilchoman peated spirit. Also getting quite a strong note of germaline. Lots of things in this whisky, especially on the nose, straight out of a medical cabinet. Also a lovely herbal wood smoke note. Some really nice farmy peat that you get on any whisky from Kilchoman. Sort of bridging the gap between those medicinal notes and the farmy peat, you've got some really nice salted licorice notes, as well as some lemoniness. Really nice maritime salted peat, even though Kilchoman is not a bayside distillery as such. They're not that far away from the sea, and whether you believe that those salty notes come from the salty environment or not, I think that Kilchoman usually has some of that saltiness, and there's some in here. Very, very medicinal though. Lovely notes of sort of TCP, Dettol floor cleaner, and after a time, as you give it more time in the glass, more of that maltiness comes out. I think that your nose kind of gets accustomed to the peatiness and the medicinal qualities and the smoke, and the barley, the malt really starts to shine through. Really nice, strong, cereal-driven maltiness. I really like when whiskies, even Islay whiskies that have all these bold flavours going on, I really like when you can still smell and taste the barley. Let's see how it tastes. You can absolutely tell that that is a natural colour whisky. And you'll have to take my word for it because I am drinking this at full 52.8 strength, which I think is absolutely fine. No harshness, it's not hot at all. Unless you're kind of, without wanting to patronise people, unless you're new to whiskey, I think that 52.8% is absolutely fine for this. Doesn't burn at all, incredibly well made. It's kind of the colour of a pale white wine. So, on the palate, more lovely, earthy, warming peat, a little bit of a sweet lemon note, very salty, a very mineral quality to this one, mineral gravel. Something that I didn't expect is that there's a very curious chocolate note to this one. And also something that I'm really pleased to see is there's a very distinctive sweet and sour smoky agave note to this one. So anyone that's got any experience with mezcal and tequila, especially the proper ballsy sort of handmade small batch craft presented stuff, you'll probably be familiar with that slightly herbal, slightly sour vegetal note that you get from any agave-based spirit, and there's definitely some of that coming through. That cask that they used for this one must have been very fresh, because you really get a sense of that cask finish. It's not just adding smoke, it's adding some of the base spirit from that different style of spirit. And it does make you wonder, is that what the SWA was scared of? Is this what they didn't want appearing in whiskey? Whiskey that has a little bit of a note of tequila in it? I can kind of see if it became an incredibly widespread thing that it could be a problem if all whiskey tasted like this. That is kind of detracting from what whiskey is, because it's no longer about the barley. But then when you mature Scotch whisky in a bourbon cask and it comes out just tasting of honey, caramel and vanilla, is that really whiskey either? But me personally, as a one-off experiment, and as long as it's not used in everything, which I really can't see it will be, I think this is a really good thing. As per the nose, as it goes on, it's not immediately up front, but there's lots of hearty cereal notes in this one as well. More of that farminess, sort of farmy peated malt as you always get on Kilchomans, at least that's something that I always find. I'd say that on the palate it's a little simpler than the nose, but still really, really good. As for a finish, it's a long finish, slightly sour and acidic, and also a little bit salty on the agave, and with a long, lingering, dirty, earthy peat that you always get from Kilchoman. So I really think that this is something that works well, if you hadn't been able to tell that already. I think that it's really a whiskey of contrasts and contradictions, which I think is kind of something that any mezcal is. Any good mezcal has lots of contrast and contradictions in it. Because I think that mezcal, one of the wonderful things about it is it kind of has sweet, sour, salty and bitter, all kind of in equal measures, and I really like that. I think that you probably can tell that this is a finished whiskey because it's maybe just that little bit light and subdued for the 52.8% ABV, or perhaps it's just so drinkable because Kilchoman is just that good at what they do. I would say that usually I am a very tough customer when it comes to selling cask strengths, especially some of the wackier, more out there cask finishes. I generally don't even really like PX. I don't particularly like virgin oak. I think that it's too dominating, adds too much spice. I don't really like that, I find it very heavy-handed. Don't particularly like quarter casks the majority of the time. I think that cask finishes are almost always worse than full-term matured whiskey. Red wine, that's another one. Don't particularly like it. Sometimes it works very well, especially on some, not all, of the Springbank and Long Row red finishes. They can be very good. Some of them are not. I obviously like sherry matured whiskey, as long as it's not too dominant over the malt. So, as I said, in terms of cask finishes and cask treatments, I would say that I'm more conservative than the vast majority of whiskey drinkers. But I think that this one works incredibly well. Better than most cask finishes do. I think that mezcal smoke and some of those agave notes, I think that the mezcal smoke blends seamlessly with the Kilchoman peat, and I think that those agave notes blend really well with the base spirit, that lemony Kilchoman style. It does make you wonder why the SWA resisted the use of tequila and mezcal casks for so long when it works this well and this unobtrusively. I am thinking that a tequila or especially mezcal cask possibly wouldn't work this well if you applied it to an unpeated whiskey, if you had something that was a lighter style, especially if it is a lighter bodied sherried whiskey and you then put it into a mezcal finish. I can see that really taking over, and it possibly wouldn't work as well, maybe a little bit less balanced, but I think that Kilchoman, because it's such a ballsy spirit anyway, it can really take it. I will also say, if it's not abundantly clear already, I do think this is a very, very medicinal whiskey, this Kilchoman in the mezcal cask. So if you're not a fan of things like Ardbeg and Laphroaig anyway, probably best stay away from this one. But me personally, I can't wait to see more mezcal and tequila cask finished and matured whiskies, and I look forward to see what we get in the future. If you have tried any whiskies that have been matured or finished in mezcal or tequila casks, let me know what you think. Do you think that the SWA was right to ban these casks in the past? Do you think that they're right to ban any casks, or do you think it should just be a free-for-all? And if you do think that, what sort of casks do you want to see whiskey matured in the future? Thanks for watching, and cheers.